We're jumping right into an explanator of the book Introduction to Logic today. Now, I know Introduction to Logic might sound like a pretty dry, heavy academic subject, but the framework built by Irving M. Copy, Carl Cohen, and Kenneth McMahon is actually your daily load-bearing architecture. Seriously. In Introduction to Logic, Copy, Cohen, and McMahon show us exactly how to build our choices rather than just stumbling into them blindly. We're looking at the architecture of direction.
You're probably treating every single thought like it's progress. And look, I totally get the feeling. We hold on to this belief that if we just collect more perspectives, gather more data, get more opinions, we'll eventually find clarity. I really wish this weren't true. But look at where it actually leads us. This kind of endless open-mindedness. It's often just directionless thought wearing really clean clothes. You aren't stuck because you lack ideas. You're stuck because every single idea in your head is getting equal weight.
We constantly confuse the feeling of clarity with actually having a valid route. Let me ask you, are you building a bridge or are you just decorating it? You can have a plan that feels absolutely right, something deeply emotionally satisfying, but if you step out onto it, is it going to hold your weight? Confusing the feeling of being clear with possessing a structurally valid route means that your strongest, most fundamental premise might still be completely untested. It's an illusion of progress.
What we're actually doing here is hoarding perspectives until one of them finally gives us permission to move. We literally outsource our direction to the loudest premise. And let's be honest, what is that loudest premise usually made of? It's rarely the truest one. More often than not, it's just fear. Or it's a desire for status. Or maybe some borrowed language from someone else's life. It has emotional heat, sure, but absolutely zero structural support.
We really have to separate taste from construction. Taste asks, hey, what feels good or looks right to you? Construction, on the other hand, asks a much colder, harder question. What can stand under load? A reason can point you in a general direction, but a valid argument must actually carry the heavy load of reality. If you're treating your massive life choices as matters of taste rather than matters of construction, you are going to build a very fragile life.
I want you to remember this core concept from Introduction to Logic. A conclusion is not a trophy. You don't just win it because you argued passionately or because you just really want it to be true. A conclusion is a debt. It's a debt that must be paid by the argument. If the route getting there is weak, your confidence is just noise. And the dangerous thing is, noise can easily be mistaken for guidance if you aren't paying close attention to the structure.
This brings us to a cold but entirely necessary discipline. We have to start asking, does it follow? We have to test whether the movement from your initial thought to your final conclusion is actually structurally owed, rather than just emotionally attractive. Most people test their ideas by emotional friction, like does this feel harsh, or will people approve? Logic cuts entirely underneath that. It simply asks if the conclusion is structurally supported by what came right before it.
Let's look really closely at the materials we're building with. Every claim in your life is a structural beam, and every premise is its footing. A premise is simply a statement that supports the conclusion. It's the concrete poured deep into the ground before the house even goes up. If you're examining a major decision you keep revisiting, you have to look down at the footing. What is the actual premise holding this entire thing up?
And that brings us to the conclusion. Your conclusion isn't just some abstract thought floating in your head, it is what you are actually living by. I want you to think about the conclusion you're acting out in your life right this very second. If your very first premise smuggled in despair, or fear, or a desperate need to be liked, then this whole structure you're living in is compromised. Your conclusion inherits the exact strength or the exact weakness of the premises beneath it.
So here is where all the pieces connect. Inference. Inference is the movement from your premise to your conclusion. It's the joint in your architecture. It's the weld holding the steel together. When you feel directionless, your mind doesn't need more exits. It doesn't need more rubble to sort through. It needs one single load-bearing path, where the inference is completely clean. You just need to know that the movement from point A to point B is solid and secure.
So, what exactly is validity? It's a structural relation. You see, logic isn't about being right in some loud debate or humiliating someone with how smart you are. It is strictly about testing the root. It's a load test. By ensuring your arguments are valid, you make sure that you're no longer governed by untested, fragile premises that are just going to collapse the moment reality actually applies pressure.
The keystone is earned connection. Certainty doesn't arrive as a sudden emotional high. It arrives as structure.
When your premise connects cleanly to your inference, and that inference connects cleanly to your conclusion, you earn your connection.
We have to reframe that voice inside your head. The untrained inner critic attacks your worth. It tells you you're broken, you're a failure. That is just shame. But a trained engineer? An engineer merely tests your structural joints. It looks at the blueprint and says, this beam is misplaced, this premise is weak. That's refinement. You have to turn your inner critic into an engineer. Don't let it attack the builder. Train it to strictly evaluate the beams.
Now, one of the biggest threats to your structure is ambiguity. Ambiguous terms create false bridges. A vague term is literally a fog machine in your argument. It allows one single word to smuggle multiple, shifting meanings through a single choice, making you totally believe a bridge exists where there is actually only thin air. Think about the slippery words we use every single day. Words like success, respect, freedom, discipline, love. These are words we let slide all the time. But respect, for example, could mean basic human dignity, or it could mean total, unquestioning obedience. If you let key terms shift their meaning mid-route while you're trying to make a decision, you end up building your entire life on fog. I want to think aloud alongside you for just a second. Which word is doing illegal work for you? Which vague word is secretly protecting an old wound or allowing you to avoid a sharper, much more honest premise? I'm not entirely sure where this leaves us right now, but let's just sit with that. This brings us to a pretty profound resolution. The reason you felt directionless wasn't because you lacked a path. It was because you trusted unbuilt paths. You were waiting for certainty to arrive as this magical feeling rather than taking the time to actually construct it. Certainty, where it is actually possible in this complex world, arrives strictly as structure, and structure is something you have the power to build. Here is your keystone practice. First, write down the conclusion you are actually living by. Second, list the exact premises holding it up. Third, circle the term that slips. Find the word that's acting as a fog machine. And fourth, rebuild one joint today. You have to stop obeying the emotional weather inside you and start building a shelter in that weather by sharpening your terms and actually testing your joints. Chase honest structure. Before you do anything else tomorrow, I want you to test one single decision using this method. List the premises and check the inference. If you don't do this, you have chosen to stay exactly where you are, trusting the loudest, most fragile premise in your head.
At upgowise.com, access your personal growth map.
You do not stumble into clarity. You do not wait for the fog to clear on its own. Direction is built, not found.